Hi, good evening, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to the Writers Guild of America East. My name is Bo Williman. I'm the president of the Writers Guild East and also a board member for Hollywood Health and Society. This turnout is amazing. Really appreciate you all coming out this evening to listen to the incredible panelists that Kate has assembled along with staff here at the WGAE East on a really important topic. It was a panel very similar to this one several years ago that greatly influenced some of my own work that I've done on reproductive health, assault, and a number of other issues that had to deal with women's health. And I had sat on a panel that was confronting issues surrounding women's health and was supposed to be there as someone to offer some, experiences of having written and worked in that arena, and found that I was actually learning a hell of a lot more than I was offering. And that's one of the great things that Hollywood Health and Society does. It's why I'm proud to be a part of their board, because Kate and her staff, they help writers make sure that they're telling stories that truly reflect our society. They have a Rolodex, that's the 20th century term, but they have a Rolodex of over 2,000 experts that they'll put writers in touch with on a whole host of different issues having to do with health and related topics. They provide research to writers who request it if they needed to do a deep dive on a particular topic for a story that they're writing. And very importantly, they do face-to-face panels like this, where you not only get to meet and listen to experts in the field, but also have a direct interaction and conversation with them as a group, as we're doing tonight. So it's a great honor to be able to host an event like this. I do a fair amount of work with the Planned Parenthood affiliate in my home state of Missouri that's really on the front lines of confronting a lot of ignorance and misinformation that has to do with reproductive rights. And one of the great things about television, and film, one of the reasons that I get up in the morning is because I know that if we do our work well and we really do the homework and we really listen, observe, and make sure that we know our shit, then we have the opportunity to share stories, information, perspectives with millions of people across the country and the world, including places like my home state of Missouri that is in desperate need of needing to know more about these issues in a comprehensive and responsible way. So I'm going to shut up now so we can get to the main event, and it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Falb, who's the director of Hollywood Health and Society. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear okay? Okay, good. I have a big mouth, but I want to make sure. So welcome. Bo did half my job for me because I was going to stand up here and give you a commercial on what Hollywood Health and Society is, but now you already know. But I'll just reiterate. So Hollywood Health and Society is a program of the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism Norman Lear Center. So it's a big mouthful, but we're a nonprofit, and we are a free resource to the entertainment industry on all the things Bo mentioned. If you need to connect with a scientist or a medical expert or someone who's an expert in national security, call us, email us. We can put you in touch with them. We can get the information you need, or we can set up a call between you and that expert, or even bring that expert into your writers' rooms, depending on what you need. And our goal really is to just help you do the research so that you can tell the incredible stories that you tell. So call us, email us. I say this, only half the audience gets the joke, but I say we have operators standing by to take your calls. So please feel free to do it. We're here and we're at your service. We're partnered with both the Writers Guild East and West, so we're part of the organizations that serve you. Just want to give quick special thanks to Bo for being here tonight, and also to the Writers Guild East for hosting us, and Dana and Marcia. And from the staff of Hollywood Health and Society who have come to join me here today, Armine and Zach are in the audience, and you'll hear more from them later probably. And also thanks to Planned Parenthood, who's brought their virtual reality experience that I highly recommend you take part in after the panel during the reception, where we're going to have food and wine and so forth. You can go and feel what it's like to walk into a women's reproductive health clinic through crowds of people that might not want you to be going there. And it's quite profound. So I highly recommend you do that afterwards. You have in your hands bio sheets on all of our panelists, so I'm not going to go into detail about who they are. You can read about them. They're illustrious and fabulous. You also have inside your little pamphlets some evaluation forms that we hope that before the night is over you'll fill out and let us know what you felt about tonight's event and also what you'd be interested in learning about in the future. And also, I think you have little note cards in there, and that's for our Q&A time. So we want to be as sort of, what do I want to say, organized as possible with our Q&A. So during the panel, if a question comes to you or something that you want to ask, jot it down on that note card, and we have some pens in the back if you don't have one. But just write it down, and Armene will be going around the room collecting them, and so then I can go through them and ask them if we haven't touched on that topic already. So feel free to do that. Now, without much more to go, tonight we're here to talk about repro rights, right? And choices about how or how not abortion is addressed on TV. How well it's done, if it's done at all, and if it should be done. Okay, so to set the stage, I'm going to invite Gretchen Sisson of UC San Francisco to come up and tell us what she's been spending the last 5 or more years of her life doing. So, Gretchen.
Hi, everyone. As Kate said, I'm Gretchen Sisson. I'm with the group Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, which is in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of California, San Francisco. So we might be the only group that has a longer organizational name than Hollywood Health and Society in total, but there you have it. So I'm the lead investigator for the Abortion on Screen program. So as Kate said, I've spent the last almost 5.5 years studying how abortion is portrayed in our popular culture, which basically means I watch a lot of television, often bad television, at my desk. And I'm here today so that I can spend the next 5 years watching better television at my desk. So before we jump into our panel, I wanted to give you an overview of what's happened on TV so far. Where are we? What's changing? What's missing? And the bad news is that in aggregate, it could certainly be better. But the good news is not only that it's getting better already, but that there are still ample creative opportunities for writers to take advantage of. There are plenty of new ways to tell these stories. There have been about a little over 200 abortion stories on TV since the 1960s. And when I say abortion stories, those are stories where a character considers getting an abortion, and characters get abortions at about half of those, which is probably not too unrealistic if you look at all of the women that consider getting an abortion compared to those who actually do. It's hard to get numbers on that, but that's sort of the landscape. So we're looking at slightly over 100 stories on TV in the past 50 years where characters have gotten an abortion. And I want to talk a little bit about the types of stories that we've seen a lot of already. So like what ground has been well trod. We see a lot of white women. So as of 2015, this is the issue with studying pop culture, is that I was like going through pulling out numbers for tonight. I was like, I need to do this study again because I know that it's changed since then. But as of 2015, 87% of characters obtaining abortions on TV were white women. And this contrasts with reality where the majority of American women who get abortions are women of color. We also see a lot of teenagers. So teenagers on TV proportionately account for twice as many abortions as their real-life counterparts. Because we see younger women on TV, we also see a lot of non-parenting women. So 85% of the characters on TV who get abortions are not parenting. They don't have any children when they decide to get that abortion. As opposed to real women, the majority of whom already have and are raising children when they decide to get an abortion. Now, there are exceptions to this. One of my favorites is Jane the Virgin, which gave counterexamples on each of these 3 points, with Xiomara, as you saw in the clip, middle-aged Latina grandmother who got an abortion in 2016. And fun fact, she's the second grandmother to get an abortion on TV. The first one was Maude in 1972, thanks to Norman Lear. That's right. But these demographics then often skew the reasons why characters are getting abortions as well. So you have a lot of these teenage characters getting abortions because they feel that they are unprepared or too immature for parenthood. What you don't have a lot of is women saying, or characters saying, I need to get this abortion because I need to care for the children I already have, because the characters don't already have children. And that is one of the most common reasons that real women give for getting an abortion, is needing to prioritize the family that they're already raising. This narrative then also creates a dichotomy between women who have abortions and women who are mothers that doesn't exist in real life. It's also important to note that this doesn't make individual depictions wrong or inaccurate, per se. There are hundreds of thousands of white teenage girls getting abortions every year in this country. So there are, those are stories worth telling. They are not inaccurate, but in aggregate, it shows us whose stories are being told and whose stories we haven't seen told yet. We also see that abortion is very dangerous on television. So almost a third of abortions on TV, about 30%, include a complication. In real life, it's 2%. And while the real life complications in that 2% are usually very minor, like intense cramping that might require some pain medication or the need for outpatient reaspiration, the complications that we see on TV for that 27% are hemorrhage, infection, patients needing hysterectomies, leading to depression and infertility and maternal death. The maternal death rate for abortion on TV is 7,000 times greater than in real life. So if you need an abortion, don't get one on TV. But the biggest recent shift that we have seen in the past few years is the inclusion of abortion stories on a greater range of genres. So until a few years ago, all the abortion stories on TV were on dramas, particularly medical and some legal dramas. And the drama was always created either in the agonizing, hand-wringing decision-making process going into this, or in that medical drama of the physical and psychological risk of the abortion itself. Today, we have seen a shift from this sort of heavy-handed decision-making and exaggerated risk to finding stories that focus more on navigating barriers to access, figuring out when and with whom and how to disclose an abortion, and then considering what the abortion means for that character and their future goals and relationships. So that means that abortion stories no longer have to be as inherently dramatic as they are, and we have seen a lot more comedies that are including abortion in pretty novel ways. We've all, and one of my favorites is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, where you see her kind of go through the process, and then you don't find out she's had the abortion until you hear her tell her son in this really lighthearted way, and that's how it comes out, and it becomes about her career as a paralegal and as a lawyer, or on Grey's Anatomy, where you see Christina get the abortion, and it really becomes about what that means for her relationship with her husband. It's about something else, not just the abortion. It's looking at the character's whole life in ways that we weren't seeing 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. We've also seen horror programs that address abortion. If you look at the old school, campy horror movies of the 60s and 70s, there was plenty of abortion, and the horror was always in the abortion itself. The abortion procedure was risky and scary, and that's where the horror was. What we've seen more recently on these programs is the horror is not inherent in the abortion, it's in the process of being out of control of one's body, or feeling the invasion of a forced pregnancy, and that psychological terror of being out of control. So we're seeing, even in genres that have done a poorer job, we're seeing new types of stories being told. People always ask me what I think are the biggest opportunities, and I actually think science fiction and fantasy have told very, very few abortion stories. And just think, if you are writing about a world that is completely untethered by the medical, technological, and political contemporary realities, what can you offer an audience in imagining what abortion care could look like? What could this procedure be in some magical, fantastical world? What could access look like 200 years in the future, if you're not in Handmaid's Tale? So there's an opportunity to think very creatively and give audiences a new way of thinking about this. So happy to answer any questions after the panel. I have so much data. If you have any very specific number questions, that's my jam. But I'm going to turn it over to the storytellers here. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we can move this out of the way now. Okay, now I have to use this. Okay, so we're going to get to the panel. And I would like to introduce our panel members who are here in person to come up. Dr. Willie Parker, Lizz Winstead, Amy Everitt, and Kathleen Bedoya. Yep. And then we have some virtual panelists who I don't know if you guys can see us, but we can see you, and that looks like it's Liz Flahive there on the screen. So welcome, Liz. And do we have Carly Mensch as well?
Carly's actually still in color correction, but she'll join us soon.
Okay, she's having her color corrected. All right. So we'll start. I know how that is. You know, I was at the hairdresser just last week. Well, we're going to start with Willie. And again, you guys all have your bio sheet, so I'm not going to get into who's who, and there's fabulous information about all of our panelists in those sheets. But I'd like to invite Willie to just tell us your story and how you came to be and believe and do the things that you're doing these days.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this panel and to have audience with people who I guess are mightier than a military army, because they say the pen is mightier than the sword. And so here's a regiment of people who have the most effective and powerful tool in our society. And right now in this era of alternative facts, it's really important to be able to engage with people who can shape and counter the notion that there are anything other than facts. And so by having a chance to be here and talk with you all, I'm excited about the possibilities of people having a better understanding about abortion, and that will go a long way towards decreasing stigma and shame. I think the easiest way to describe why I do the work that I do, in my book, say that when you wrestle with your conscience and you lose, you actually win. And that's a very succinct way of me saying that I had to reconcile my identity as a person of faith, of Christian faith, having made that personal decision at the age of 15 growing up in the South in the Bible Belt, or actually the belt buckle of the Bible Belt in Birmingham. And an identity that is essential to my understanding of myself as well, and that is as a woman's health provider and a physician trained to do obstetrics and gynecology. And initially, I didn't have to reconcile that because there was no conflict. My whole conversion experience predated the narrative of abortion as murder before the founding of the moral majority in 1980. So I was able to cruise along in my faith identity. And it was not until I became an OBGYN and had women asking me to help them to end unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or wanted, but legally flawed ones, that I had to reconcile what it meant to hold those two identities, being being a women's health provider and a person of faith, and having people tell me that if you are a Christian, you can't do abortions because abortions are murder, and so there's something mutually exclusive about those two identities. And so I had the audacity and took the courage to say, since they are both essential to how I understand myself, I've got to reconcile it. And as a scientist and as a scholar, you know, I was the kid in Sunday school who, when I learned about dinosaurs and I learned about Noah's Ark, my question was, where were the dinosaurs on the Ark? And those questions will get you kicked out of Sunday school, right? So as I began to wrestle with what it meant to be a person of faith and a rational, critically thinking person, the first 12 years of my women's health practice, I didn't do abortions, not because I didn't think women had the right to make that decision, but I erred on the side of not violating my own conscience. And so that required a values clarification that came to fruition when I was practicing in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii, and was in charge of providing services for women who relied on a clinic where that care was provided, given that Hawaii was one of the first states to legalize abortion. And so we had an administrator who said, you know, because I'm a Christian, I believe that abortion is wrong, we're gonna stop this service. And I'm saying, can he just do that? I don't do them, but women have the right to have them, and my patients need them and they get them. And so we fought that battle through administration, and I was ultimately told that he could make that decision. So we were gonna be stopped. And so I went home that day trying to figure out what my role was gonna be in the face of this injustice. And I was listening to, my habit was to listen to incredible speakers. And on my cassette tape, yeah, it was a cassette tape, that's how long ago it was. And it was cued that day to the sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King, his last sermon, which for me, the last week made it even more poignant because it was 50 years ago, on the night before he was assassinated, Dr. King preached the mountaintop sermon that most people know. I may not get there with you, but we're gonna get there. But in that sermon, he also used the parable of Jesus about the Good Samaritan. And I'd heard that story multiple times, but this time I heard it differently when I contemplated what my role was gonna be in helping somebody who needed help. And in the story, the Samaritan is the person who stops to help a traveler who's been mugged. Everybody's passing him by. Most people have an obligation either by vocation or by kinship to help, but they don't. The Samaritan doesn't have an obligation at all. He stops to help. And Dr. King uses that story to say what made the Samaritan good was his ability to reverse the question of concern. And whereas the other people ask, what will happen to me if I stop to help? Samaritan asks, what will happen to this person if I don't stop to help? And in that point, I heard myself in that story. And so it prompted me to understand that not only was it appropriate for me to be more concerned about what happens to my patients when this care is not available, but it became ethically and morally imperative for me as a women's health provider standing in that office to make sure that women had access to the service that now 1 and almost 4 women will need. And so that I decided to do that and decided not to be quiet about it is what made me a public figure around pushing back on this narrative that there's something mutually exclusive about providing this vital care for women and people of faith. And you're free to believe that. Where it's become problematic is that it's entered into the public discourse around policymaking. And my notion is that the only way you can cure venom is to create an antivenom, but you create antivenom from the venom that was poison. So the only way to push back on this overreach of a religious narrative is to have a religious counter-narrative. And so I'm not being opportunistic or being entitled about my faith, but I know that the only pushback on where we are now is for people of faith who do this work to say that the only relationship with reproduction is not one of refusal in religion, but there's also the ideology of reproductive provision of reproductive rights, religious provision of reproductive rights. So I'll stop there.
Wow, wow, thank you. I'm going to kind of go around a little around Robin Hood's barn, so to speak, because I know Liz and Carly may have to leave us before we finish. So I'm going to jump to Liz now. This Liz, we have two Liz's. That one, the one live is with two Z's. So Liz Flahive, welcome again for being here. We can all see you. Oh, great. Okay, good. We're all waving. So Liz, you're showrunner and creator of the current show Glow on Netflix, and it's female leads and female stories. So was abortion just kind of a natural, I'm looking at you, you can't see me, but I'm looking at you. Was abortion just a natural story to tell, or tell us about how the story came about?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was for us. It wasn't something that we, in our first season, we definitely had stuff stories we knew we wanted to tackle in the first season, and this came up really organically as we were building later in the season. And sort of once we hit on it, it felt, there wasn't a lot of back and forth on, whether or not to tell the story. It's sort of once we figured out that it was a very natural story to tell for our main character, we just started building it. So in terms of, just to say, like, once we decided to do it, we did it, kind of a thing. And I think on a show where we have 14 women in the cast, it felt to us just like a very sort of natural thing to do, story-wise.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems, we saw the clip, but I think what happens after where the clip cut off was she just gets up and goes on about her life, and there's not really any more discussion about it or anything. It's just, it's very matter of fact and no drama really. And
I think that was a big thing for us in terms of tonally what we wanted to do too. I mean, Carly and I both say, like, we're a show about bodies in a very big way, and I think making a choice about your body was something we wanted to tell very clearly and simply in that story. We have so many women on the show using their bodies in different way and making choices about how to use their bodies in terms of in the ring and in the world, and this felt like, obviously an extension of that to us.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to keep in the entertainment piece for a minute and go to Kathleen. So your show is a little bit different kind of a show. It was designed really to begin with to sort of teach or model behavior. Is that not right? So I know you probably did a lot of research on preparing for the show and to put it together. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you did?
Well, the whole objective of the show from the very beginning was to address, in 2010 when we started developing it, 50% of Latinas under the age of 20 were pregnant with unplanned pregnancies. And so we wanted to address that and see, using a model of knowing this model that the media is so powerful that when you create behavior that the audience can identify with, it has been shown that you can impact the behavior of the audience. And so we went into this whole, what is the issue here with pregnancy? And when you start talking about pregnancy, you have to dive into abortion and into religion and into what are the feelings around abortion, around male responsibility, around the use of condoms, around the access to pregnancy prevention. So we had to do a lot of research. I went into every single high school in East LA. I went to the clinics. The high schools in East LA have, which I'm from New York, so I was fascinated. They have an entire clinic that gives the kids condoms in bags. They could come, they could leave class at any time they want and pick up the condoms. They provide all the services, and the kids know about the services, but they still don't use them. And also the tricky thing for us was that so many of our audience, you have to really know your audience when you're talking about this, because our audience, there's a lot of single moms, young teenage moms in our audience, and we didn't want to stigmatize them. We didn't want to say what you did. So it was that was the hardest part about writing this, was how, and we had an advisory committee of 15 different organizations: Planned Parenthood, Advocates for Youth, the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. We had all these different organizations, and with you guys too, just constantly asking for information. So we knew what the issues were, and we had all the research, and we had to use it to create situations that were really realistic. And so we had one girl who gets pregnant and chooses to terminate her pregnancy, and another girl who chooses to continue with the pregnancy, and not in like a judgmental way. We just wanted to present options so that the audience knows, okay, what is our options? So many of them didn't even know that a medicated abortion was possible. There were so many that wrote to us, and then at the end, people wrote, you know, after watching your show, I really changed my mind. I was really against abortion, and I've changed my mind. I didn't realize all the different points of view. But it was really those crisis pregnancy places were so, there's so many of them in Southern California, and they're religious, and so they'll pull the girls in, and what they do is they keep them from having testing done, so that by the time they find out and they tell them they're pregnant, or it's already too late. Yeah. So those are some of, but we definitely used a lot of research, and it was really helpful.
Great. Yeah, we're going to get into the crisis pregnancy clinics in a minute, and we saw a clip from John Oliver where he talks about it. But again, I want to capitalize on having Liz there. And so this question really is for Liz, Carly, and Kathleen, and maybe our other Liz too, to some degree. I mean, when you're dealing with these topics, but both of your shows are on streaming channels, Hulu and Netflix. Did you get any resistance from Liz? Did you get any resistance from Netflix on this topic?
We didn't. I mean, we're in a very fortunate position in terms of creatively, we have a lot of freedom, but we got zero pushback. I will say, like, they were, you know, fully in support of the script, fully in support of the shooting. You know, I think that is, I think a lot of streaming places just have more freedom that way. But no, it was a very creatively, it was a really open and, you know, free process in terms of what the story we were telling and how we were telling it.
And is your writer's room, I'm presuming, primarily female, or? Primarily female. We had 2 men to 5 women season 1, and then season 2 we just had 1 guy. So. There's a story right there. You just got to interview him and see what it's like on the other end.
But just to say that about that, you know, Nick Jones, one of our male writers, was the one who wrote this episode. You know, we broke it all together, but, you know, as much as we say we are a very female forward show, our male writer did write this episode, and I thought it came out spectacularly well.
Good on him. That's fantastic. Yeah, right? That's fantastic. Kathleen, what about you? Did you get any pushback?
On Hulu, we had zero pushback. Likewise, we were unbelievably fortunate on the creative end. But what was interesting was when we were initially pitching the show to the networks, they were just like, woo, too many Latinos having sex and taking drugs and abortions. And they're like, oh, we don't think this is for us. So it was like just network after network, just turning the show down. Like, there was no way that they were like, can't you put some other people? And I was like, well, you know, the last time I checked, you know, the place I grew up in, there were no white people. But it was just, that's constantly. So I think that on a network level, we received much more pushback versus on Hulu, it was a non-issue.
And what about in your writer's room?
The writer's room was much more complicated, surprisingly, really surprisingly, because abortion is such a deeply personal issue that has impacted one of the campaigns we did that Advocates for Youth does is that it's the 1 in 3. 1 in 3 women will have an abortion, and each one of the people.
1 in 3 women will have an abortion at some point in their life.
At some point in their life. And every person, and it was mostly women, all women of color, and two men of color. And every single person had a different story to tell that had to do with abortion that was impacting their decision about the character and what she was going to do. And she was a very troubled character. She was a very hard character to write. And all the different ways of how much do we show, how much do we not show? Does she say it? Does she tell her boyfriend? She should tell her boyfriend. Why shouldn't she tell her boyfriend? And it's like, wow, what a bitch. And it's like, why? I mean, it's her body. She doesn't have to tell her boyfriend. And who cares? And it was just going on. And but it was all in good. I mean, it was all good, but it was definitely conversations that went on for a while.
Interesting. And then what was the demographic of your writer's room? Balanced male, female, or? Two men, and 4 or 5 women. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying anything here. I'm just asking. We did have a panel last week, actually, about a different topic, but it did come up that, you know, more women in the writer's room tends to get more stories about women. You know, so I'm just putting it out there. I didn't say it. It came out of the panel. Okay, so Liz, I'm going to ask you one more. So you also were on Nurse Jackie. Mm-hmm. Did they ever do an abortion storyline on that? Or how did Showtime, or how would have Showtime felt about that?
I don't think we did. I mean, I remember, I don't think we did. I don't think we ever did an abortion story. And I don't know what exactly that has to do with, but I mean, we told a lot of, you know, female health stories, but I don't know if it was just, you know, an ER. I don't know if that's necessarily a place where you completely tell that story fully, or maybe, but no, we never touched it there.
Okay. I'm going to ask Lizz Winstead, who's here with us. So we saw a few funny bits about abortion. Is it harder to be funny about abortion? Do any of you writers get, well, do any of you guys, if you write anything that sort of could be funny or a little bit edgy in terms of humor around abortion, do you get pushback? Do you get?
Of course, it's abortion. But I think that you accept the provocative nature of what you're talking about, and I think that when we talk about abortion and how to use humor, I mean, you know, there's a million abortion narratives in the Naked City, right? And the one that we never hear about, as to Gretchen's point, and as just Liz, thank you, your portrayal was really wonderful, as that if you are going in to have an abortion and like you understand that you are ending a pregnancy and that pregnancy could become many things, and that personally I believe that there is no morality in pregnancy. Society places a morality in pregnancy, and that should be an individual thing, right? And so if I feel like I can tell stories about the idiots who are trying to legislate abortion, I can talk about my own abortion experience, and if I find humor, I mean, I have a joke in my act where I say I chose to not have kids a couple of times. And people are like, oh my God, how can you say that? And I'm like, how can you tell me not to? It's my personal experience I bring, and then I understand everything that will come at me from saying that, right? So it's really understanding why you want to say it, what's the purpose behind it, and then being able to defend it, knowing that you're going to get detractors and haters. And quite frankly, I really don't care. It's not talked about enough. I feel like putting it in the public square. It's interesting to talk about how do the networks react on a it's too controversial level. I come from political satire and places of that nature where people didn't want to talk about it because men didn't want to hear about it. And so the erasure of the issue, to me, is as important as talking about the how a network's going to feel about it, right? I just want to say one other thing, too, is that the 1 in 3 statistic is actually changing now to 1 in 4 because of access to long-acting contraceptives and stuff. We can talk about it being 1 in 4, and so I just wanted to say that, too, as a 1 in 3 campaign. Yeah, it's kind of nice, right? So I think I answered that question, right? So yeah, I put the humor through it through many lenses, and also understand that that's not everyone's experience, but it's also is an experience, and I embrace and salute people who can find humor and bring humor to the topic, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, great. You know, I was talking to a writer on a dramatic show, and a male, and I was asking him about, you know, doing stories on abortion and what he felt about it, and did it give him the willies, and was he afraid of what the network would do or say? And his answer to me was, well, it's not for me to tell that story. I leave that to the women writers, or I leave that to the, you know, I don't feel qualified to write that story. So I leave it up to the women in the writer's room. What do you guys, Liz on camera, what do you say to that? since your guy wrote an abortion story, I mean, is that kind of a common attitude?
I mean, I think like let's leave it to the women is like a problematic perspective in terms of, you know, I mean, just I think it's a women's health issue that is an important story that can be told by, you know, writers that are empathetic, that are compassionate, that are interested. I mean, I think to make it, I think let's put it this way. I don't necessarily think you should write the story without women, but I don't think you should leave the idea of pushing it off to make it a women's story that can just be told by women. I think maybe a little dicey.
I know other Liz has an opinion on this, so.
I say it all the time, and that is, so often men will say to me, I can't believe you're still fighting this fight. And then I say, I can't believe you haven't been fighting it with us. Because if you actually believe and understand that the full emancipation and humanity of women, the very first step to that is controlling your own reproductive health, to your economic journey, your full humanity. And if you call yourself somebody who cares about human rights and you don't understand that you too need to center that, it's one of the biggest problems with the narrative when we talk about it all the time. So, dudes.
And I,
Willie,
people,
I think that was your entree.
I asked why I'm so passionate about being an abortion provider and advocating for women to have body autonomy by controlling their reproduction. And I think sometimes when you talk about something straight on, it's too heavy, but if you can speak by analogy, they get it. And the thing the perspective that I try and use to help them understand why I do the work that I do is found in one of the answers that President Abraham Lincoln gave about why he signed the Emancipation Proclamation and freed the slaves. We know the Civil War was a complex thing, but one of the answers that he gave that moved me was that when someone asked why he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he said simply, as I would not be a slave, so I will not be a master. Which is to say that I want for other people who are human beings what I want for myself. So I don't have to have a uterus or a vagina to understand what it means to live life on my own terms. When Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death, it became the rallying cry of the American Revolution. That the content of that same statement from a woman who's pregnant with a pregnancy she doesn't want is that a woman who has an unplanned, unwanted pregnancy will pursue an illegal, unsafe abortion over pursuing a well-funded, legal and sanctioned pregnancy with a paid-for birth, which is to say a woman will be willing to die living on her own terms rather than to have a life that she doesn't choose. And so that shouldn't be a hard thing for a man to understand, because that's the determination to live your life in terms of human dignity. So it's not about what's in your pants, it's about what's in your head and your heart.
So for writers too, I think that part of what the nuances, like that impact eventually the decision to have an abortion or not, we approached a lot of the male responsibility, and there's so many things as a writer that you can do that are really small, easy things to do that reflect that. So for example, when there's a sex scene, we have characters talking about birth control or showing it, or in a way that's not cheesy or like, you know, like a PSA, but something simple, or a conversation, dialogue between two people about contraception, or about how they feel about having kids, or about all of those, like showing openings like that as a writer, I think all contribute to the conversation, because it shows that this is not just about the women's decision. There's other things that go into this, other responsibilities, and all these different, from access to, like, how do you get there? Where do you go? Like, all those things can be addressed in a storyline without having to do this heavy abortion episode, you know?
So, okay, that's a good segue to Amy. So Amy is going to give us the 30,000-foot view of abortion in America right now, and sort of in 3 words or less. No, but just to, you know, tell us a little bit about what it is. I know different states have different laws, and we're fighting for, you know, they're fighting for change, and in both directions. So give us kind of the overview. So for those of you who are writing, and depending on where your show or your project, what state it's in, you'll know. So you've got 50 states to cover. And,
Go.
You know.
So the first thing I want to say is, since 1 in 4 women have access to abortion care in their lifetimes, that also means that 1 in 4, at least men, have had an interaction with a woman having an abortion. So this isn't a woman's issue, it is a family issue, it is an issue, a human rights issue. It's an issue for everybody, and if we write the men out, then we're giving them a pass as well. That's my PSA on that one. So what's happening in America today, I will confess, is both frightful and hopeful. Because abortion has become a very political topic, I'm going to start at 2010, when you started imagining your show. In 2010, there was an earthquake in American politics on a lot of levels. But the one that a lot of people didn't notice is that in 2010, not only did pro-choice forces lose the US Senate and the US House, we also lost about 20 additional states, meaning a governor's mansion, a state Senate, and a state House or state Assembly. For decades, the pro-choice movement had always had one of them in most states. We had had a pro-choice governor, we'd had a pro-choice House, we had had a pro-choice state Senate. So when crazy bills were being proposed, there was always a stopgap. We had a firewall. But in 2010, that firewall got run over, and literally, I think at that point, 35 or 36 states became completely anti-choice. And so we started to see this enormous rollback of reproductive rights. It wasn't the beginning of it. They had been trying to roll back these rights for decades before. They just now had the opening and the ability to. So I'm going to talk to you about what the sort of public policy landscape in America is like. In most states, not my home state of California, but most states, there are efforts to ban abortion. And they couch it in a lot of different ways. 6 weeks, by the way, that's way before most women even know they're pregnant. It's called the Heartbeat Bill, Ohio, and many other states, all the way up to 20 weeks. So let me make this real in a story way. If you are past 20 weeks pregnant and you are seeking abortion care, one of a few things has happened. One, all the other bad laws that have stopped you from accessing care have delayed your care to too late, including being able to find the financing for it. Or you have been to a crisis pregnancy center, a fake women's health center that has delayed your care. Or if you did, that is when you start getting your, if you had DNA testing or genetic testing, that's when you get the results. That's when you start to find out, do I have a healthy pregnancy? Is this a pregnancy that is viable? And I can tell you, as somebody who has had an abortion and who has had children, those genetic testing are scary moments. And you're either grateful or you're making really difficult decisions. And if you have no time to make that decision, it's powerful, because no matter, the story about abortion is that most women, if you are white and wealthy, you can find abortion, and that's true, unless it's after 20 weeks in America. Because after week After 20 weeks in America, there are only 4 or 5 providers in the country, and they are backed up. And so nothing can get you an appointment if you're just out of luck. So those are laws that are being passed in 35 or 36 states right now. Some states have already passed them. Some have been enjoined because they are patently unconstitutional. Others are still moving forward. And fun fact, the U.S. Senate, the federal Congress and Senate have been trying to pass a 20-week abortion ban for a long time, and it's only by the grace of 1 or 2 Republican women senators that they have not been able to achieve that goal. And that would impact all states, including California and New York. So that's one bucket. Abortion bans are one bucket of policies that we are dealing with. Another one are what are called trap laws, targeted regulation of abortion providers, and I know Dr. Parker can talk to this much better than I can. These are laws that are specifically aimed only at doctors who provide abortion care. Not colonoscopies, not eye doctors, nothing that is in fact more dangerous than getting an abortion. And they include a wide range of issues, and they can be from last year's Supreme Court case or 2 years ago Supreme Court case requiring that a center be an ambulatory surgical center, so a place where you could actually do open heart surgery, or and all you're actually doing is giving out some pills. You don't need to be able to perform open heart surgery. You need to be able to have admitting privileges in a hospital. Again, nice in theory, but in reality, abortion is one of the safest outpatient procedures in America, and very, very, very few people end up at an ER. And by the way, if you do end up needing hospital care, the hospital has to take you in the ER. They can't say, oh, this is related to an abortion, go someplace else. So these trap laws are now one of the first areas of law that we have been able to impact and start to say, no, these actually do create an undue burden on women's health, and they are moving there. But states are still passing different kinds of trap laws. Sometimes they target it right down to where a clinic is being built. Suddenly the local ordinances are, oh, you can't have a front door and a back door. You have to have a side door. The grass has to be cut to a certain length, or you have to have a certain number of parking spots. I mean, all of these things are the reality trying to drive abortion providers out to close their doors and stop providing care. Another area are biased counseling and mandatory delay. So there's, I mean, the patriarchy in this is hard to avoid. A bunch of guys in legislatures think that they should pass laws that may require women to think for 24 hours, 48 hours, or if you're in South Dakota, 72 hours about whether or not you get an abortion. And in South Dakota, ladies, just so you know, you can't think on weekends or holidays because those days don't count as part of your 72.
Actually, 7 states have a 72-hour ban.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Missouri actually has the worst abortion laws in America.
Yes.
Yay.
Get to work. So those are, that's another bucket. And then you have consent laws. You know, so you have parental consent and parental notification laws. And then you have 3 or 4 states, one of which is Oklahoma, that actually is trying to pass a law. And in some states it's passed and it's been enjoined. And it says this: the man, the partner, the potential father has to agree to the abortion, or you can't get it. And if he is not available, your next closest male relative can stand in. Hi, Dad. Hi, little brother. I mean, what? So we can laugh about that kind of law, but I can tell you that in this movement, we have been laughing about laws or ideas for laws that are now law. And so they are persistent, and they do not take failure lightly. They keep going until the circumstances all align for them. So I will just conclude by saying not only is it frightful, because it is, but it is also hopeful. And the reason it is hopeful is because so many of these laws are so egregious, and it is happening in such a much more dynamic and exposed way that more and more people are getting more active. The idea of talking about abortion, we have been asking people to share their stories for as long as I have been involved in this movement, And people now are. And it's partly the tools on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, et cetera. But it's also because we realize our silence and the silence of all communities on this issue is actually complicit in having the other side win. Bringing shame, bringing stigma, or silence is the same as supporting the other side.
All right. Willie, did you want to talk about the TRAP laws a little bit, just from your point of view?
Well, just I think she laid it out very, very well. For example, in terms of the unethical practice of being required to give medically inaccurate information to people seeking abortion care because someone has the political power to make that reality. For example, in Mississippi, you're required to tell a woman seeking abortion during the consenting process that having an abortion increases her risk for breast cancer. It is, you know, science. You can always find, science is only as good as the people doing it, and you can have an agenda where people can make misrepresentation of facts look like legitimate scientific processes. And so, but that information you can be required to tell. I'm required to tell a woman that abortion could increase her risk for needing infertility and injury to her uterus, but those are the exact same attendant risks for giving birth. In fact, you're much, as you heard, you may already know that you're much more likely to have complications related to childbirth than an abortion. And in fact, we just wrote an op-ed piece for Glamour magazine, and I highlighted the fact in Mississippi, now that they've reduced the amount of time a woman can access abortion to 15 weeks. The irony is people in Mississippi are more concerned about abortion rates than they are the infant mortality or the maternal mortality rates, both of which are abysmal for women in that state. So we ignore real data-driven problems in exchange for pseudoscience and illegitimate facts. But those are the types of things that get enacted under the TRAP laws because they are, as you heard, are designed to make it just almost cost prohibitive for abortion providers to provide the care, because in order to comply with the regulations, you have to expend so much capital that it's impractical to continue.
And I also just want to add that these laws were created in model legislation back in 2010, when these were created by an organization called Americans United for Life, and a woman named Charmaine Yost was the head of that organization and the one who created these laws. And she is now the head policy person at the Department of Health and Human Services. She's the one who was bringing in all these horrible people that you hear about, Tom Price and Teresa Manning and all these people. So she is literally, right now, as we speak, creating federal policy that is mirroring all this really crazy shit. And we have a video about her on our website at Lady Parch Justice that tells the whole story of them with monkeys.
Okay, we're going to get back to that. So I have two other questions that are kind of related. Kathleen, you brought up, sort of the religious, well, Willie brought up, of course, the religious piece, and you brought it up a little bit because your audience, I would think, most Latinos, and I hope I'm not wrong in saying this, are probably Catholic or Christian of some sort. And so did you find pushback about it from the religious community regarding your show? And then you also touched on the crisis pregnancy centers, which kind of goes in that same direction. So I'd love you to comment on those, and then I'm going to go to Amy and Liz for comment on the crisis pregnancy centers as well.
What was interesting is that because I'm also was raised very religiously, I was very concerned about the religious part and how much the audience would push back on it. But when I interviewed all the kids and I interviewed the nurses in these high schools, and they said, you know what, they're religious, but they're having abortions. People have abortions. Women have abortions. Like they're Catholic, but you know what? They go to church and then they go and have an abortion because when they need it, and their mothers are coming with them. So that was a big reality check for me too. That I was like, wow, it isn't. I think that the whole, and that the real Christians that I saw were really, again, like they were the ones that were at all of those crises. It wasn't, so I saw it as more this duplicitous thing of what I thought was going to be the biggest pushback. Really wasn't. We had such incredible feedback regarding, there's so many other things that they were concerned about. And what's interesting is I've developed shows in Colombia, in Mexico, when you travel into Latin America and you see it's all the same kind of that resistance, but women are still having abortions. It's a woman's need. It's part of reproductive justice. But when I went to Cuba, which is where I'm developing a show now, it was such a non-issue. It was there's no stigma. They were like, yeah, we get abortions. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's one right down and like it's paid for, and it was so interesting for me to see when you pull certain things out, like where in a place like that where there isn't all the feedback, or it's much more isolated, that there was no stigma, that it was another part of the process of, yeah.
That's really interesting. Crisis pregnancy centers, tell us what they are. And
Me?
Anybody. Go for it, Liz. Or
okay.
Amy.
Well, it's a crazy, complicated thing. But there's a couple of things John Oliver got wrong. There's like almost 4,500 of them around the country. And what they are is they are centers that have been opened for the sole purpose of dissuading people who are seeking abortion. If you've ever seen an ad, how many people are unfamiliar with this term and what we're talking about here? Just so I'm not. Right. Okay. So if you've ever been on a bus or a subway or seen a billboard that said like "pregnant, need options, free ultrasounds, call us." Have you ever seen something like that with a picture of it? Okay, those are actually ads to lure you into a place that is run by people who are not medical providers. They have no license. Oftentimes, the Knights of Columbus or the Catholic Church has bought them an ultrasound machine. They get you in the door. Oftentimes, they open across the street from an actual provider or next to an actual provider and have names like the Real Clinic. So it's like if there's a clinic that we went to Hartford with my organization, we actually help them, Real Clinics, combat them. In Hartford, the Real Clinic is called the Hartford Women's Center, or the Hartford GYN. And the fake clinic is called Hartford Women's Center, and it's 12.5 feet across the street from the other place. Looks exactly the same. And they will jump out of their house, because it's like a house. They will literally jump out of their house, and as someone's walking up to their appointment, say, oh, you have to come here to get your ultrasound and check in first, and then you go to that facility. Someone gets in there. They oftentimes will say, okay, great, we're going to get you your ultrasound. You're nervous, you're scared. You're like, okay. You'll get undressed. They will take your phone and your clothes, and they'll be like, okay, we're just going to take your stuff, and you'll just wait, and you'll think about it. You're not thinking this is a fake place, so you're like, that's fine. Now you're vulnerable in a gown, ready to get an ultrasound from a person who's not a medical provider, who puts the jelly on the belly, gives you an ultrasound, and says to you, oh, looks like you're, I don't know, somewhere around 14 weeks long, so you have a bunch of time. So what we want to do is talk to you about your options. You may have a miscarriage, so if you're thinking about having another procedure, you might want to wait a little bit just to see, because the body oftentimes naturally miscarries. So why don't we have you come back in 3 weeks, and then we'll see how we're at. The person comes back in 3 weeks. Turns out their ultrasound was a lie. They were farther along, and now they are no longer available to give birth. In 14 states, to have an abortion. In 14 states, your tax dollars pay for this. Keep these centers open. No, because they're not licensed. You can pretend to be a doctor legally, which in America, you can just fake it. You can pretend to be a doctor if you're not, because when you hear things like, they'll say things like, we provide medically accurate pregnancy tests. So does the dollar store, but that sounds good, right? We provide ultrasounds. Sounds like a medical thing. We'll give you STD testing. All those things sound medical. Literally they dress up in doctor's coats. And they literally have scrubs on and look like medical people. Now, it's so insane, I'm gonna turn this over to Amy, that the state, and the thing that John Oliver didn't talk about, which I found kind of crazy, is that the Supreme Court just last month had a hearing because California goes, you know what, it seems kind of bullshit that people can do this. Maybe we should pass a law that says, hey, if you're not licensed, you should have a sign up that says you're not licensed. Well, these crazy people were like, wait, that's gonna get in the way of our deception. We're taking it to the Supreme Court. So, Amy, take it away.
I'm not even sure what to do with that. Let me say this. So these fake women's health centers, these crisis pregnancy centers, there are thousands of them. They have one agenda, and that is to talk women out of accessing abortion care, no matter what. In California, we actually did an investigation where we had one woman go to about 45 of these centers. It was a very bad month for her. By the end of it, I'll just share this story. By the end of it, they had all been pushing ultrasounds. Have an ultrasound, have an ultrasound. She kept saying, no, no, no. Finally, she was so bored. She said, okay. And so she had 3 different ultrasounds. And in 2 of them, and she was not pregnant, and in 2 of them, they pointed to her IUD and said, there's your baby. And only one of those 2 noticed that it didn't have a heartbeat and suggested that she would spontaneously miscarry. So, I mean, these places, and in California, there's actually a lot more laws than you have in most states regarding these. But a lot of people think that, well, of course somebody would know that they had walked into Crazy Town. But the reality is, and there's actually, we were just talking about, they're having a conference in Anaheim, California today. They have these conferences where they train people on how to open these centers and how to look and act and talk just like abortion providers, with the sole intent of attracting what they call abortion-minded women. They don't care if you're pregnant and you're scared and you need health care. They don't want to see you. They only want to see you if you're thinking about accessing abortion care. And so everything Liz said is accurate, but I will take it one step further and talk about the public health problems that these places present. First of all, once you're able to essentially escape this so-called care, and you finally get to a place that will actually give you care, they need to ask, what's your gestational date? What is the date that you conceived? Photos don't tell you that. Ultrasound photos don't tell you that, and they can never get the material. They do not care. They talk about how they care about the woman and all of her options. The reality is that I've talked to doctors who have talked to women who had diabetes, which is totally manageable. Thousands of women who have diabetes have successful pregnancies because they get real care early on and they manage their blood sugar level. And if you're not getting that care, you're not managing your blood sugar level, and you have negative health outcomes for yourself and your baby. And that is what is happening, is that women are wasting their time. Women are busy, right? We don't have a ton of time. Men are busy too. Women are busier. And when you take time off of work or off of school, you probably arrange for childcare for your other kids. You're taking this time to go to a doctor and get the help that you need, and you've just wasted your time, and they, in many places, have actually wasted even more of your time. This leads to worse public outcomes. How do you get to a 20-week abortion? This is one of the ways that you get to a later-term abortion. And so we in California did pass a law. It is at the Supreme Court. What we're really hoping is that everybody does what John Oliver did and talk about these places and expose them, because when we talk to people about these centers, people are horrified. People who identify as, in this instance, I will identify them as pro-life. They find it outrageous, because the reality is that everybody does have a right to hold their own opinions about things. You do not have a right to lie to women about their medical care. And everybody finds that outrageous. And so again, the more we are able to share that story, the more we are able to shine the light on what they are doing, which they hate. And I will just tell you one example of why they hate, how they hate this so much. In California, we passed in about 5 or 6 years ago, a different law, truth in advertising law, because that's how they get people. Is you do a Google search for New York abortion care, and you're going to get these fake centers. So we were in litigation forever. They took this case. Let me give you the brief history on this case. We passed this law in 2015. Within 3 weeks, we had 4 federal court cases filed in the 4 federal courts of California. They went up asking for an injunction, saying, please don't allow this law to take effect until the courts have ruled. All 4 courts said, no, we think this is a constitutional law. It's going to happen. We're not going to enjoin it. It became law. They appealed that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Ninth Circuit agreed with the lower court. So then you have 5 federal courts agreeing that this law is constitutional. But there has not been one court case on this. This is all on the injunction. And the Supreme Court, I mean the Gorsuch Court, I mean the John Roberts Court.
The garbage court.
Thank you. Reached down and plucked this up because there had been no discovery, there had been no litigation, there had been no conversations and no rulings on the merits of the case. No research had been done, which is how they prefer it. Because in the false advertising one that I told you about, we found out so much about how they operate that the judge ruled on her own that there's actually commercial speech and needs to be regulated as commercial speech, not just a personal opinion speech. And they did not want to have any more exposure, which is why I think this court case came to the Supreme Court about 5 or 6 years before it actually should have.
Yeah. I also want to say, too, because of that law, my organization, if you go to exposefakeclinics.com, we have an entire programmatic of how you can exploit them. And what you can do is when you do Google, where do I find an abortion, these places come up. We have a whole map. You can click on a state. You can go to their website, interact with their website, and then you can write a simple Google review. Like, don't be snarky or an asshole. Just be like, I went there. It took me 5 minutes to recognize that I couldn't get an abortion at this place. If you're looking for an abortion, don't go here. So at least when vulnerable people are searching to find a place to have an abortion, if one of these places comes up, there will be reviews that say, this place does not provide abortion, and they'll move on. They won't be subjected to the next step of showing up there.
And I just want to add one. Okay. So just imagine if you don't speak English. And so that's the thing. You don't speak English. You might be undocumented, yes, or you might know people that are undocumented. Yeah. And in the Latino community, I don't know, in the ones that we knew about, they offer them money. They give them money to buy car seats, and they give them money. And so it's like, oh, somebody's taking care of me. But the minute you have the baby, they drop you like a hot potato. And yes, in Atlanta, we found, I was developing something in Atlanta, and I could not believe, that's when I realized just how pervasive it was, because I just couldn't believe it. It was, but anyway.
Well, also, we've had women who have gone into these centers who they purport to offer diapers and all this kind of stuff, and sometimes they do, but women who went in there with children and said, I need diapers, will you help? And they said no.
Wow. Okay, do we have Liz and Carly, or did they have to go back getting their color corrected? I think they did. All right, well, all right. If you guys hear me and you want to jump in, please do. But we're going to go to Q&A now, because afterwards we do have food for everybody. So I have a few questions that people have submitted. This one is for Dr. Parker. Could you please tell us about how you deal with threats to your personal safety and to the safety of people who work with you?
Well, with regard to the people who work with me,
do you get threats, first of all?
The answer to that is the sky blue. I do get threats, psychoterrorism. People know they're skilled enough at this, they don't make direct threats. They'll say, it would be a shame if somebody shot you in the head. I know where you live. You need to watch your back. If you think you can kill babies and get away with it, you are dead wrong with dead, D-E-A-D in caps. So yeah, there's definitely an effort to intimidate and to terrorize. They exploit the fact that there have been providers killed doing this work. So being mindful of that, what I try to do is I don't ignore the risk. I try and right-size the risk. I've had no concrete, literal threats where people have, I've not had people follow me or anything like that. I have had people show up at my place of residence when I wasn't there. But I have a relationship with the law enforcement, and so I do what I can do practically. But I've decided what I live for versus worrying about what they can do to me, because if I focus too much on that, then I lose my nerve like anybody else. I am mindful that staff who show up every day, they also take their tone from how vulnerable I feel. So if I show up and I'm afraid, then they become unsettled. So I don't put on a false front, but my way of managing the risk is right-sizing it and responding only to real threats and not hypothetical ones.
And I would also just say, in tandem to that question, my organization, Lady Parks Justice League, we literally spend 3 months out of the year traveling around the country, going to mostly independent providers, which you might not even know about independent providers, but we do, it's a band of comics and musicians and actors, and we do a show, and then we have a talk back with the providers and the activists that live in that community, so that the audience can hear what faces each of them, and then we grow their activist base by having people sign up, and then we go to the clinics and we provide literally aid and comfort. We do everything from gardening to cleaning their gutters to taking them out for happy hour, because they are forgotten. I've been literally to 130 clinics, and 130 clinics have said to me, "Thank you for coming here," because nobody comes. So there's ways that you can really get involved and really be out there and helping them, because if you bring them into the light, they feel comfortable there. And it's super important that we lead them and we say we're happier in our neighborhoods and our communities, because you're literally making the lives of the community better and stronger.
Okay, this is a question for Gretchen, so I'll hand you the mic. It says, in your studies, how prevalent do you, and this is actually for any of the writers too, how prevalent do you find the anti-choice narrative to be today, like in television and film? And I don't know if you guys have encountered it in just in writers' rooms or any of that, and what do you see?
Yeah, so, sure. Right. So as far as explicitly anti-choice media, they tend to make their own. They make their own films, they make their own reality TV shows that they stream on their own websites. And they don't have like big releases and big commercial audiences, but they'll screen these at churches, at youth groups, and it's hard for us to be able to quantify how many people are actually seeing these products. I think it's a lot. I think it ends up being a lot, actually. And these are pieces that are intentionally made by anti-abortion filmmakers and creators. They have nonprofits that are specifically dedicated to creating these, and they kind of find under the radar ways of getting those out there. And they're often specifically targeted to young people, to teenagers. So there's that. As far as kind of anti-abortion narratives that we see cropping up in mainstream television or films, they're definitely there. 5 years ago, almost any plotline that you saw would have like some counterpoint, like, you know, the neighbor who is also pregnant, who is going to continue, like, and that was something that the networks were really serious about, particularly through the 80s and 90s, of really having that balance. You don't see that quite as much these days. That seems to be sort of phasing out. But you do have a lot of misinformation about abortion, and it's less misinformation. Well, some of it's misinformation because it's just a mistake. Some of it's disinformation, which is the intentional cultivation of these narratives that the anti-choice movement puts out there. And I think that things like the dramatically exaggerated physical risk of abortion on TV, that's an anti-abortion narrative. There's a reason that gets traction. And so there are definitely inaccurate misinformation, disinformation, anti-abortion elements that
that come bubble to the surface in these mainstream plot lines. But there aren't a lot of mainstream TV products or movies that are created with the intention of promoting an anti-abortion message.
Can I speak to something that was when Gretchen quoted a statistic earlier, it prompted me to think about, it ended up becoming a chapter in my book, Life's Work, A Moral Argument for Choices, the chapter where I wrote about Black genocide in the white majority, because what happens when you look at, when you do proportionate representation of who has abortions, when you look at the representation of Black and Latina women in the population at risk, the size of their population at risk for the number of abortions they have, proportionately, you put them together, proportionately they're the larger group of women who have abortions, but the actual largest number of women who have abortions are white women. And the reason I say that is because people do what I call epidemiologic mischief. They take those numbers and they create a different tale. They create a moral crisis around there being targeted availability of abortion resources or coercion of Black and brown women. And the reason it's important to understand and to make sure that when we talk about these numbers, morality isn't proportionate, right? And so when you talk about this becoming influential on the ability of individuals in communities, irrespective of their color, it becomes a problem. Abortions come from unplanned, unwanted pregnancies. That plagues all people at risk for having penile vaginal intercourse without a birth control method. But when sometimes with, exactly. But in terms of being clear about understanding when you represent and being clear about when we say like the majority of women, you're talking about the proportionality versus the absolute number. And that becomes critical because the whole Black genocide movement and argument was based on people taking the numbers and saying the largest proportion, and they created this impression that there's this targeted effort to get brown people to decimate the population, which has another link to this whole notion of stratified reproductive value and the quest that more white women have babies because of the kind of notion that white people have fallen below the replacement rate. So it really gets to be an interesting thing.
It's plurality versus majority.
Right.
Plurality versus majority.
The largest group of women getting abortions is still white women.
Right.
But it's less than 50%.
Right.
So I know we're running, we're good, right? Time-wise, a couple of minutes. Well, if you can, in 2 sentences or less, down the row, just what would you like to see on TV with regard to this topic? 2 sentences or less.
What I love to see is dialogue. You know, like real, not black and white dialogue, like real nuance, like what are couples really talking about? Married couples, young couples, like what, we love to put in the show, like real conversations that are not like this made up stuff, like just, and that comes from finding out what is the pulse of what's going on, whatever your audience is. And also to use, just to plug the Health and Hollywood Society, it's been
Hollywood Health and Society.
Health and Hollywood, because we've used you guys from like, how will this gunshot look? Will they be able to die from this gunshot? To like immigration, to everything. So it's been, so those 2 things I think would be my last.
Great. Amy?
What I would want to see on TV are storylines that talk about a woman's life and the partners that she has, and how abortion is just one step along the way. That it is not the end-all, be-all decision she will ever make in her life. It is one of many decisions she and whatever partner she has will make in their lifetime together. That bodily autonomy, when women have bodily autonomy and can control their reproductive rights, they will thrive, their children will thrive, their communities will thrive. We will all benefit from women having that autonomy.
Liz?
Abortions are boring to show. So what happens in the narrative life of somebody who has one, and especially depending on where your show is set, what that means. The barriers are real and super fucked up, and like really focusing on like somebody needing to do a simple thing and what those barriers mean. So, you know, and don't put people in an ambulatory surgical center with a big hat on. You don't need that. Like the scandal abortion was the worst abortion on TV. It was like it was like such a bummer. Maude. Well, we didn't see. The first one we saw. That's true. Good point, Gretchen. Good point.
I mean, she's given us a lot to work with. There's always room for improvement.
The door has been opened, maybe, right? Willie?
Given that we turned abortion into a moral and a political and a religious issue, I'd like to see narratives of people wrestling with however they come by their morality. Most of in this country, most of it's religious. I'd like to see a religious narrative of where there's conscientious provision of abortion and not just conscientious refusal. So say a storyline where someone turns to their faith as the justification for doing an abortion versus turning to their faith mosque and the like. So people go to their faith communities to figure out how they feel about a thing. So more narratives where there can be a counterpoint from within the context. If you're going to deal with faith, you know, maybe some more texture there.
Great. Okay, one last, Liz and Carly, I don't think you're there. So, all right, well, before we thank our panel and applaud, we have a special little treat. We're giving you all a preview of an animated short video that we have made, Hollywood Health and Society, along with Life Noggin Studios, that features Dr. Willie Parker and Lucy DeVito. So you're going to get a chance to get a sneak preview of this video. So take a look.
Hi, I'm Lucy DeVito, star of the Hulu series Deadbeat. In the early days of television, some topics were considered too taboo to portray on screen, even if they were common in real life. Many popular shows in the 1950s and 60s had married couples sleep in separate beds to avoid any implication of sex. In one episode of I Love Lucy, Lucy announced she was pregnant without saying the word pregnant, because that was too risque. Roughly a decade later, I Dream of Jeannie featured a woman with a bare midriff, but executives demanded she cover her belly button because it was too provocative. Even normal bodily functions were over the line. When Leave It to Beaver wanted to show a toilet, CBS only let them use shots of the tank. The bathroom in the Brady Bunch didn't even have a toilet. And we had to wait until 1971 to hear the first toilet flush on TV during All in the Family. And that toilet was still off screen. Compared to this, we've come pretty far. From sex and pregnancy to violence and profanity to race and sexuality, TV has certainly evolved.
But some important topics are still taboo, like abortion.
This is Dr. Willie Parker, OBGYN and chair of the Board of Physicians of Reproductive Health. He works for reproductive justice and provides abortion care throughout the southern United States.
Nearly 1 in 4 American women will have an abortion by age 45, but this common procedure is often over-dramatized and inaccurately shown on TV.
Since the dawn of television, there have been over 400 plot lines about abortion. The most common plot lines feature young, single, middle, or upper-class white women who don't want children because of school or work. A 2014 study revealed that a whopping 90% of characters considering abortions are white.
But in America, white women make up less than 40% of those who get abortions, while 55% are women of color. And while over 80% of abortion stories are about middle or upper class women, the truth is nearly the opposite. 3/4 of American women who choose abortion are low income. More than 60% are already mothers, and 40% terminate their pregnancy because of financial reasons.
TV shows also over-dramatize the decision to get an abortion and make it seem more dangerous than it actually is. Most women who make the choice are certain about it, often more certain than those making other healthcare decisions, such as getting knee surgery.
For nearly 99% of American women, abortion is a safe and complication-free experience, unlike on TV, where 10% of the characters die from the procedure. Legal abortions in the U.S. are actually 14 times safer than childbirth. You just wouldn't know it if you turned on the television.
In truth, trying to get abortion care is the real drama.
Almost 60% of American women of reproductive age live in states hostile to abortion rights, with anti-abortion laws or a lack of providers. And in 7 states, there's only 1 abortion clinic.
Other hurdles include long travel distances and steep costs. TV programs rarely show these obstacles, and when they do, the characters usually overcome them easily. So why do we care how TV portrays abortion? Because TV has the power to shape our worldview. Studies show it can specifically affect how we understand health issues. If what we see on the screen is wrong or misleading, it can lead to misguided fears and decisions based on falsehoods.
For example, most abortion patients think that the procedure is more dangerous than it really is. Television can help set the record straight with more accurate storylines.
For perceptions about abortions to change, there must be more consistent and honest plot lines about it. There are over 400 TV series currently airing, giving the entertainment industry plenty of opportunities to depict abortion as it actually is, a safe, legal, and common procedure.
If programs can get the facts right, they will dispel false myths, shatter taboos, and help enlighten viewers. So
who will lead the charge? If you want to write about abortion, contact Hollywood Health and Society.
Now, didn't that look just like Willie? I mean, really, right? Square head and everything, right? Well, let's thank our panel.